Yo, we're live. Just like that, we're here. Welcome to our second ever Hot Fan Theory. I'm XJ. That guy over there is my brilliant co host, Geoff, as people know him in these parts. This is a live stream where we're going to discuss various topics with listeners, bring them on the stream to actually talk out their perspective and topics where instead of just kind of talking at you and sharing what we think and all the data that we have supporting our views, we want to hear from you. We want you to come on and tell us what you think and why. And we're not going to belittle you or roast you about it, but really just want to hear other people's perspectives and like talk through it at a deeper level and see if we can come out to some kind of agreement or some kind of space where we're more closer to the same page than when we started. Today is a good one because we're focusing on the debate around who should be the fifth starter for the Knicks. Should it be Josh Hart or should it be Deuce McBride? We want to bring up a bunch of people today, if we can, to hear their perspective. So if you want to be part of the conversation, please let us know in the chat. Drop a chat. I already see Kevin Danishevsky in the chat is going to be joining us. I know we have Coach Jaden coming on a little bit later. Salute to Maverick, Mach 5. Salute, bro. What's going on? But yeah, anybody else who wants to come on, please drop a chat and we'll get you on. Geoff, what's up, man? How's it going?
It's going great. I thought what you said, I mean, you always do such a good job of introducing the show, but I like what you said, especially about seeing if we're closer than you might think. Because I found in my experience that almost every big discussion, whether it's sports, whether it's life, no matter what it is, the two extreme sides are never absolutely correct. There's always common ground. There's always a middle ground. And ultimately, in a case like this, there is a quote unquote right answer. But that doesn't mean that it's 100-0. You know, there are trade-offs and there are positives to both sides. And so I think it's really important to try and conceptualize and understand the dissenting perspective and, hold yourself accountable because we're not perfect. We're wrong all the time. So getting smart people, getting reasonable people up here who would like to just have a good faith discussion and maybe open our eyes to stuff that we haven't thought of. That's one of the most valuable things you can do in any conversation. And so, yeah, we're really excited to do that.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here, and hopefully we do a good job at it. But really, this is not going to be possible without, people in the audience to jump on and tell us their perspectives. I mean, you and I could kind of break down some of the pros and cons of each of these approaches of starting Josh Hart or starting Deuce McBride. There's so much that goes into it. It's just definitely not a simple kind of discussion of like one is insane and one is like normal or one is okay or one is not acceptable. Like there's so many arguments that you can go both ways on it, and I think we really hope to break down all of that. And then also while we're on, hopefully we'll also get the information about who's actually starting today in preseason game number 2. You and I were talking about this at some point, but it is possible. I don't think this is the case, but it is possible that Tibbs is just trying to see what the starting lineup looks like with Josh Hart and with Deuce McBride himself. Like maybe he ran it out with Josh Hart preseason game 1, and preseason game 2 we'll have Deuce McBride out there, and he just wants to compare and contrast some of the pros and cons of each one. So we may find out that somebody else is starting. Who knows? Maybe preseason game number 2, Precious Achiuwa starts instead of Josh Hart. Like there's no way to know for sure. So a lot of things can happen. So I don't know what you think about that, Geoff.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I think that one of the ideas that we toss around a lot here at High Hand Theory is that there's a lot of value in using the regular season to see what will work in the playoffs. Like there are very few teams. The Celtics of last year are an example of a team that could have entered training camp, entered the preseason, started the regular season, and just been like, we know what we're going to do. We know what our best 5-man lineup is. We know that Al Horford is like a nice little facsimile of Kristaps Porzingis, but for the most part, we need these 5 guys to be healthy. We need these 5 guys to be playing a lot because this is our best 5-man lineup. This is one of the best 5-man lineups in recent memory. But that's the exception. That's not the rule. I think most teams need to do a little bit of experimenting and figure out what their best lineup is. I think the Knicks would be included in that group. I'm not going to hash out my whole perspective on the Deuce side. I showed XJ this before we hopped on. I wrote, I think, a pretty compelling case for Hart because I wanted to try and steelman that perspective and make sure that I understood it at least to the best of my capability. But of course, people can come on and say more. I'm not saying I've thought of everything. But one of the things I did say about the Deuce side, the Josh Hart iteration of the starting lineup is going to play a bunch of minutes this regular season, regardless of whether Hart starts or not. Like, we will get to the end of the regular season and we will have a feel as Knicks fans, as NBA fans, as analysts. Tibbs will have a feel for it. Everyone is going to have a feel for how good that lineup can be by the end of the regular season, whether Hart starts or not, because it's going to finish plenty of games. Hart's going to play 30 minutes a game regardless. Those 5 guys are going to share the court whether or not Hart starts. If Deuce doesn't start, that lineup won't play. And we saw it in game 1 of the preseason. They didn't play at all. And I know it was limited minutes, but I would bet anyone who thinks I'm wrong, I would bet that lineup doesn't play more than 100 minutes in the season, save a huge injury that forces it to play. But like, if there's regular health and Josh Hart is the starter from opening day, we will not get any feel whatsoever as to if the Deuce lineup could be better. And that's worth finding out. They're close enough. I mean, Hart and Deuce had the same EPM last season. They're close enough as players, and the stylistic differences matter enough that you need to find out which lineup is better. And to be frank, we just won't find out unless Deuce is the starter. So I do think that is almost like a cherry on top of an argument for starting Deuce, because it gives your team a better chance of finding out what your best lineup is.
It's a great point because, to the point of the chat, we won't find out tonight what that lineup looks like because Deuce McBride is apparently out with the flu and is not going to be playing. So we won't even find out 2 preseason games in, and we won't see that lineup play. And to your point, we would always see this Josh Hart lineup play. Well, we may never see this Deuce McBride lineup play without injury, which would be pretty insane. But yeah, shout out to everybody who gave me that tip. Shout out Dirty Dancer, who's here for Bam Adebayo slander. There's definitely going to be plenty of that. Too many Karl Anthony Towns, Bam Adebayo comparisons. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any kind of, it's not as good an argument for Josh Hart or Deuce McBride as a Cat versus Bam Adebayo as a 5. So,
you know what's great? You know what's great about you though, XJ? And people don't understand this. And if you're like a new listener somehow and you don't get this, if Bam Adebayo just like this season, just like shot 38% from 3 on 7 3-point attempts a game, you would just be like, oh, he's awesome. And there would be no emotional like, oh, I need to make sure that everyone knows I was right before the season, yada, yada. You would just call it like you see it. And I think that's an important part of the analysis. Like, there are people who are accusing you of being like, oh, you only like Cat because he's a Knick now. And it's like, dude, that's not going into the equation at all here. It's like, you're just saying what you believe, and you're using the information that you have available. And I think that's always important.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with you. And also there is absolutely no aspect of it that's the fact that Cat's a Knick. I mean, the great Moose, the tweet that we talk about all the time, Moose on Twitter.
Dude, Moose has no idea what a legend he is to Hot Anther. He has no clue. One day he'll watch an episode.
We'll talk to him. I saw he commented on one of your posts today, actually. So, when I was talking
about Quickly.
Yeah, when you were talking about Quickly versus Darius Garland.
I muted that shit. I gotta respond to him. I can't disrespect Moose.
Can we tell the audience who the fuck we're talking about?
Everybody knows Moose, dude. He's more popular on Twitter than we are.
That's
I think.
True. Well, this is YouTube, so
yeah, fair.
So Moose just sent out a tweet basically after the Julius Randle for Karl Anthony Towns deal, and then he said something to the effect of, I gotta come clean. Like, I've been lying about like loving Julius Randle all this time, just because he was on the Knicks. You probably remember better what the tweet actually said, but it was something about it. It was
so funny. It was like lowercase, and then in all caps. It was like, I've been lying on this man's name the whole time. I never liked Julius Randle, and like. To be clear, we don't think that's funny because we don't like Julius Randle. We both rooted for Julius Randle and we're fine with him. We talked him up plenty when he deserved it. The reason that's funny to us is because there's somebody who has the self-awareness to know their biases is actually extremely rare. And like, okay, he said it after the fact, so it's not like 100% brownie points. But, you know, they're just so much with every fan base. There are people who only like their players because they're on their team, and sometimes it seems like they're not aware of it. And for him to just call himself out for that and like to do it in that ridiculous fashion, it was funny and it was self-aware. And yeah, man, he's a legend.
Yeah, no, we love that. That is going down in Hot Hand Theory lore for sure. We got a couple more comments in here from David Goodman. What's up, man? I agree with you guys, but I don't think it's a huge deal. Deuce and Hart are both going to play a lot. That's definitely true. Both are going to play a ton of minutes this season. I think we're just trying to figure out how to elevate the Knicks ceiling as much as possible. We saw that very bizarre, was it ESPN report about like the projection for where the Knicks would end up at the end of the season? Was it ESPN?
Yeah, it was like it was ESPN. It was like their new BPI rankings.
Yeah. Had Knicks at the 19th best odds of making the finals this season, which
it was like it was 19th of winning a championship, right?
Of winning a championship, yeah, it was completely bizarre. But yeah,
for anyone out there, sorry to interrupt, XJ, they're like third on all sports books in betting odds. It's just there's no for the discrepancy to be that wide. Sports books would basically be having what these BPI rankings are saying relative to what sportsbooks are saying is that sportsbooks are leveraging dumb New York fans to an absurd extent. Like they're basically saying that sportsbooks are trying to capitalize on New York delusion and excitement about these new trades. And because sportsbooks have the best models, that's been like proven. Sportsbook, there's a reason it's almost impossible to beat sports betting long-term because they have the best projection systems. They have the best models. And for them to have the Knicks as the third favorite, like they can be off. They could maybe be the fourth favorite or the fifth favorite, but they can't, it can't go from third to, it can't go from plus 800 or whatever they are, which is 12.5% would be a neutral EV there to 1%. That's just, it's almost blasphemous, but what can you expect from ESPN?
Yeah, that was completely insane to me. I was just been racking my brain all day trying to figure out like how they could justify like 40 wins as their over under for the Knicks and the 19th best odds of winning a championship. Like all of that just seemed completely insane. But yeah, that being said, we have a couple more comments in. Let's see, Nick Yak, what's going on? Says, I want Precious at the 4 starting, so we're a big team, or start Sims and keep Cat at the 4 where he likes playing. What do you think about that? Because I again, when the Knicks first got Karl-Anthony Towns, the first thought that came to my head was that Precious Achiuwa will be starting next to him. That was the thought that I had. I did not necessarily buy Karl-Anthony Towns was going to be the starting 5. I thought it'd be like Precious and Towns 4 or 5, whichever one you want to say is whichever. So I never was super sure about that. I definitely don't want to see that personally, but maybe there's some merit to it. I don't think we should just discount it out of hand. And then after we talk about that for a little bit, we have our first listener who's going to jump on, Kevin. But let's talk about this a little bit first.
Yeah, I mean, you thought that was going to happen because you're a pessimist. You were like, you just immediately were like, oh, fuck. Yeah, the way I see Precious Achiuwa is as a center. I think his lack of shooting, even next to Towns. So we were talking about Jeremy Sohan yesterday on Hot Hand Theory. And, you know, it's not completely paramount that Sohan finds a shot, especially when Wembanyama's center. Like there are viable lineups, 4+1 lineups where Sohan's the only non-shooter and Wembanyama frees you up to do that. So Towns kind of does that with Precious. You can create good lineups with Precious as the only non-shooter, and you kind of use Precious as the nominal center on offense where he's setting the screens, and then Towns and Bridges and who else? OG Anunoby are spacing. So you run like 1-4 Brunson, Precious screening for him, and you still have a ton of space. That's just not the best version of this team, I don't think. It's a totally viable lineup though. Like I think it would still be a good lineup, right? Don't you? Or I mean,
I
like
think it would still be good because Precious' versatility defensively would really help from a defensive standpoint. Their defense would just be better. Their defense would be better with Precious at the 4, better than if Hart was starting, better than if Deuce was starting. I believe that. I just think their offense would take a huge hit, in my opinion. So that's part of the trade-off.
Do you think I'm curious. I want to pick your brain about this because you say the defense is going to get better. Forget the Deuce lineup for a second. The offensive limitations are kind of similar. Is it possible that Hart versus Precious, the offense state, like, is it possible that actually the debate is should Deuce start or Precious? I feel pretty strongly Hart should come off the bench regardless.
It's really interesting. And I that's why I'm glad we explored this question by Nick Yak, because maybe that is the debate. Because with Precious starting, I do think there's a difference in spacing between Precious and Josh Hart. I do think Hart can go through stretches where he's red hot. Obviously, when he first came to the Knicks, he was hitting everything for like 2 straight months. He was shooting like 45% from 3. We saw what he did in the playoffs for stretches. Like Josh Hart can get hot and get aggressive and light it up from 3. That's not going to happen with Precious Achiuwa. It's fundamentally different in that way. It's not just a zero spacer and a zero spacer. Those are two different things. But for me, I agree. I think defensively, I think there's not that much of a difference between Deuce and Hart besides some of the rebounding stuff. But then with Precious, I do think there's a big difference defensively, and that could be some of the difference there.
I don't want to, step on anybody's toes who's going to come on the show and make a hard case. I do disagree with you there. I think that there is a difference, maybe not on the net. Like I think in a vacuum, Deuce and Hart are pretty similar net defenders. But I think when you look at the minutia, I think things that people like with Hart that maybe don't apply to Deuce is when Hart is on the court with Bridges and OG Anunoby, the 3 of them are just 100% switchable. I don't like, and this matters against a team like Boston when they have Brown and Tatum on the wings. I'm not sure Tibbs would be on board with Deuce switching just unequivocally with OG and Bridges against a team like Boston, where Deuce ends up on an island against Tatum or Brown, but especially Tatum. I think that I think that this is one of those places where Hart's few inches on Deuce actually do matter, and his size and just like his bulkiness. Again, I actually think Deuce is a net better defender in a vacuum than Hart is. I think that Hart's kind of being overrated by Knicks fans from his defense, but I do think that matters in terms of when you're comparing which lineup is going to be better. I do think that size difference is going to come into play here.
Yeah, I think that's totally valid. The only thing I'll say there is I agree with you as far as switching, but I also think that Deuce is better in different ways defensively than Hart. So if they're playing, the Sixers, I think Tyrese Maxey would expose Josh Hart defensively. I don't think he would expose Deuce McBride defensively, let's say. So I think there's different advantages. If you're playing a big team with big wings, then you probably would have a better option with starting Josh Hart. But then also you would have a much better option with starting Precious Achiuwa, who I think is really geared to guard guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So I don't know. I think it depends, but we have Kevin who's been waiting for a little bit. Let's pop Kevin on and then hear Kevin's perspective. I'm not sure if he's arguing for Deuce or Hart right now, but Kev, lay out your case, whatever you want to say. The floor is yours, man. How you doing?
Yo, what's going on, guys? This is pretty cool. It's my first time interacting with Geoff, face to face, despite interacting with you now for like 2+ years. So pretty cool moment. So as the roster stands right now, I am pro Deuce McBride being in the starting lineup, part of for all the reasons that you just mentioned. I think Deuce's shooting is really important. I don't think that there's much of a drop-off defensively. I think certainly against teams like the 76ers who employ someone like Tyrese Maxey, I think people kind of forget how good Deuce was in that series and how much better he was than DiVincenzo in that series, both offensively and defensively, actually. But I'm kind of going to get there in a roundabout way, but I'm looking at this roster right now, and there's still one piece of it that doesn't make sense. And that piece is Mitchell Robinson. And I don't think it makes sense to employ Mitchell Robinson right now for a lot of reasons. Mainly not because of the player that Mitch is. I think Mitch can be really helpful to this team when healthy. But I don't think you can rely on a guy who's had multiple, I think, 3-footer ankle injuries in the last 3 or 4 years, and is coming off back-to-back surgeries and didn't really look like himself in the second round. And so I'm anxious about that. And I'm also looking at the bottom of this roster, and that's also giving me some anxiety because the Knicks drafted Pacome Dadier with the 25th pick, and they did it not because they thought Dadier was the best player on the board, but because Dadier fit the set. They could give him a $1.8 million salary. They could give him the lowest amount salary, and right now that's helping them stay a couple $100,000 under the apron. And I'm kind of thinking that it's really not tenable to play Dadier, and it's really not tenable to play Ariel Hukporti in any situation. So if you take Hukporti and Dadier and Mitch, who's obviously injured, that's 12 playable guys. And that's just not exactly what you want heading into a year that you are trying to contend for a title. And I think especially with guys like OG Anunoby and Karl-Anthony Towns, who have had health issues in the past. So I was kind of looking around the league. I was looking on Fanspo, and a trade that came to mind was Tari Eason and Jock Landale from the Rockets for Mitchell Robinson. And maybe you'd have to direct Mitch to a third team. Maybe you would need to include some extra draft capital. I think, and in that scenario, not only could you now you have an extra roster spot, and you could also presumably use the extra money that you have to sign a 15th guy who can actually play and help you out. Potentially someone like TJ Warren, who they just signed in September, potentially someone like Chuma Okeke. So if you get into a scenario where an injury apocalypse happens, you can throw out those guys and not feel like it's the end of the world. And in that scenario, if that were to happen, I think they should probably start Josh Hart.
In the scenario where they get Tari Eason?
And yes, Tari Eason and Jock Landale. Because I would not want, presumably if they started Miles McBride, Josh Hart and Tari Eason would be in the second unit. And I really do not want those two. And next to a non-spacing big in Landale. And I really do not want those two playing together. And I would like for Tari Eason to come in and essentially spot Josh Hart's minutes. So if Josh Hart plays 30 minutes a game, let's say Eason plays about 18. I think
Kev, let's try to tie it back to the current situation, because just in general, I love that idea. Like, I would love to flip Mitchell Robinson for Tari Eason and Jock Landale.
And include whatever. It probably takes a little bit of draft capital to get that done. Maybe it takes Dadier, like whatever.
Yeah,
but
I would love if that were to happen. But just in the situation that we have in front of us right now, just for the sake of argument, I think we're just trying to figure out. It sounded like you said you would go with Deuce, and do you want to kind of lay out like a quick elevator pitch for that?
Sure. I think that I guess I want to argue against the fact that Josh Hart, the narrative that like, oh, Josh Hart would need to run backup offense, because I think that if you can use a lineup that staggers Mikal Bridges or even Karl-Anthony Towns with Josh Hart, or Brunson, you always have it. You can play it. The Knicks have enough creation where you can always have someone who is good enough, is the primary creator against bench units to go along with Josh Hart. So, and if that's your main concern, I think that it's really easy. It's really easy to get around it, especially if you're playing two floor spacers in Cam Payne or Tyler Kolek, who's probably going to be a good shooter in the NBA, or and Landry Shamet, who looks like is going to make the rotation. So that would be my argument. I kind of, I think Juice is a better shooter, just nearly as good of a defender, and the spacing is kind of what got me originally really excited about the Cat trade, because I anticipated DiVincenzo being here. And when I originally proposed this Cat trade, but now that he's not, I'm looking at the I'm looking. I think that I want to see that lineup with as much spacing as possible, because I still, with Hart, you still have some spacing concerns that I think we saw manifest itself a little bit.
Let me ask you this, Kev, because
Yeah.
I thought somebody made a really interesting point on Twitter. At least it opened my eyes a little bit. Somebody on Twitter, I apologize to whoever this was. I'm forgetting their name, but they said they think that whether Deuce or Hart start, or excuse me, in this scenario, Hart's starting, he thinks that Tibbs is going to go with a 3-guard lineup off the bench, and Precious is still going to play center. Like, one of my main concerns about the wing rotation is, I share with you, I'm worried about the spacing, and I'm worried about the wing rotation. And I think that one of the first dominoes with Josh Hart starting is, because the Knicks have no other big wings off the bench once Josh Hart is in the starting lineup, it's going to automatically slide Precious Achiuwa to power forward. I think that's going to be the direct result of Josh Hart starting. And this person said they don't think that's going to happen. They think Precious is going to remain the backup center, and the bench unit is going to be Payne, Shamet, Deuce, one of Bridges and OG, and then Precious at the 5. Were that to happen, would that change your perspective at all? Would you be more fine with Josh Hart starting were that to happen?
I would be a little bit concerned about that lineup defensively with Payne and Shamet. I think they present now. You could maybe get away with that against bench units. I certainly am. Look, Landry Shamet looked really good against the Hornets. I'm certainly not sure that you could play him against playoff teams. I remain skeptical. I think that needs to be seen. And Cam Payne's not exactly a great defender. And honestly, so Mikal Bridges would presumably be the main creator in that lineup, and that would also probably, I think we saw a defensive drop-off when he was the main creator with Brooklyn. So I would be a little bit worried about that lineup and how it looks defensively, especially against, certainly like a Minnesota.
Sure.
Not that we see them very often, but a team with a better bench unit.
XJ, would that change your mind at all? Like, we haven't even talked about that, so I'm curious if you knew for a fact that Tibbs was going to go with a spacing lineup like that off the bench, and Hart's going to get his 30 minutes anyway, and you knew that Precious wasn't going to be slid to power forward, would you be more on the neutral side, or do you think it's still clearly Deuce for you, even in that paradigm?
That definitely helps. That definitely helps a lot. But it is still clearly Deuce to me in that situation. I just think that is the lineup that includes Brunson, Deuce McBride, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Karl-Anthony Towns. I think that's the best lineup the Knicks have that can possibly run out there. And to me, I just got to see our best lineup play, like a solid number of minutes per game. Like, I don't think they need to play the whole game, of course, and it's okay if – I just don't think this is not like a death lineup situation of the Warriors where, like, you don't want to wear out Draymond Green playing all his minutes at the 5 or something like that. There aren't really, like, pressure situations that are causing this lineup to be unsustainable in the long term. I think this is a very sustainable lineup. It makes sense. The roles are very clear to me. And I'm just going to go into a little bit of like the thinking about that lineup particularly, and then, you guys can respond. To me, the only lineup that the Knicks can reasonably run out there that provides high level shooting from 1 through 5 is that lineup. Brunson, McBride, McHale, OG, Cat. That lineup would be completely unguardable. And maybe they could run out other lines with good shooting, not without the greater weaknesses that come with it. I'm just going to rattle off a few things. Catch and shoot percentages last year for that lineup. Bridges 39% from three catch and shoot, OG 40%, McBride 42%, Towns 43%, Brunson 45%. Josh Hart was at 33%. The average points per play in the half court last year, which includes turnovers, I'll say, was 0.987 points per play. And the Boston Celtics led the league at 1.065 points per play. The Knicks were below average at 0.983 points per play. Obviously, they made it up a bunch with their offensive rebounding. And a catch and shoot opportunity from any one of these players that I just said yields you anywhere from 1.17 points per shot to 1.35 points per shot. That is unstoppable. It's an ungodly offense that you would have, because if you're not getting a catch and shoot opportunity from one of those guys, it's probably because you're getting a better shot at the rim from Jalen Brunson or Mikal Bridges or someone else. So, yes, you can have Josh Hart play instead of Deuce McBride. Yes, the defense could be a little better with the rebounding. You could have some offensive rebounding to offset some of the issues that you have in terms of spacing. But you are providing the defense with an out if you play Josh Hart. They were going to help off of him. They were going to be able to scramble. You can try to scheme up things to offset, the spacing, the way the defense plays them, but it's just more difficult. It just is. It requires consistent off-ball action. It requires more energy offensively. It requires well-timed cuts. We already saw some clunky cuts where guys, the spacing was all messed up because they cut at the wrong time in the first preseason game. So to me, it's clunkier. It's going to lead to a worse offense. And it requires a ton of synergy that I don't think they're going to necessarily have. So when you get Karl-Anthony Towns and you give up a guy like Dante DiVincenzo, to me, you are fully embracing this style of play, not partially, not like, we're going to put our toe in the water and then kind of embrace 5 out a little bit, but then we'll have Josh Hart in there because we want to hedge and also get rebounds. No, when you do that, you're going all in. You're playing 5 out. You have 5 guys who can shoot 40% or greater all across the board. And to maximize the team ceiling, that's the approach that you have to have. And so that's really my overarching view there. And I know there's other arguments that we'll go into, and Geoff has said a lot of different things that don't necessarily all revolve around the spacing aspect. But to me, that's the critical aspect. And that's why there's no other lineup that it would change my perspective on it.
XJ, I pretty much agree with everything that you just said, but one wrinkle that I want to maybe throw in just to kind of steal in the position a little bit or things that I've seen on Twitter is, and just to phrase it like a question, are you worried if they start Deuce, are you worried about not taking advantage of fast break opportunities? Because a lot of the offensive value
I'm not worried about that at all, because I don't think that, and Geoff had mentioned this, like if you have the most efficient offense in the NBA, you don't have to thrive on fast break opportunities. And I think if anything, I think the bench is going to require more fast break opportunities to create offense with Jalen Brunson not on the floor. I actually really like Josh Hart when Jalen Brunson's not on the floor, because now you have a different look. You have a different way to score. You have a different way to approach being able to be an efficient offense with offensive rebounding and fast breaking. I actually like, a lot of people may disagree with this, I actually like Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa out there together, because then you are commanding the offensive rebounds, you're commanding the boards, and you can sprint up and down the court with Josh Hart out there. And those are different ways to score that it gives you an entirely different look from the spaced out 5-out offense that they'll have with the other 5 shooters out all at the same time. So you have these different looks. It just has advantages in both ways, in my opinion. So it really wouldn't change. That's not something I'm worried about at all.
I presume
when you have a really good offense, the ancillary things that sort of artificially boost offense become less valuable inherently. So, like, actually, what did you call it on KFS a couple of years ago when the Knicks had the second best offensive rating, but you were like, it's kind of like
fake offense.
Yeah, there you go. When you dug into the minutia of the Knicks offense, both last year and the year before, they had these great offensive ratings, but they were built upon low turnovers and offensive rebounds. So like they weren't effective. They were, but they were efficient because they just kept getting the ball back and eventually putting it in. But this Knicks offense with Deuce and with Towns can actually be efficient and effective. They can, in the half court, be, their ceiling is the best offense in the NBA. That's what their ceiling is when they have the 5-out spacing. And inherently, you become less reliant on gimmicky ways to score, like fast breaks and like offensive rebounds, when you're already a great half-court offense. I'm not saying they have zero value. Of course, they still have value. I'm saying the value of a Josh Hart fast break goes down when it's relative to the ceiling of an offense that could be number one in the NBA. And also, to XJ's point, that in the inverse, the value of things like fast breaks and offensive rebound go up when Jalen Brunson is on the bench. That, all of a sudden, that is where those things are more valuable. So when people talk about the value of a Josh Hart fast break, right now it is most valuable with the bench unit. It is as least, relatively, it is least valuable with the starting lineup because the starting lineup is already going to be elite offense anyway. So relative to those possessions, it becomes less valuable.
I agree with all that. Bayside Jr. says on the Legler pod, he was really praising Tyler Kolek. Does that change anything if Kolek emerges as a true Brunson backup point guard option? Legs was really giving him high praise. So what do you think about that, Geoff?
I think it changes. I think that's another argument for Deuce starting. Because if Kolek is a legit backup point guard who you're going to give the Brunson minutes to, then Deuce's only position really is that off-ball shooting guard. That's it. That's where he is. He's not going to get those backup point guard minutes. Those are going to go to Kolek. So if we really like Kolek and we want him to play 15 minutes a game as a backup point guard, then Deuce's role is very firmly in that off-guard shooting guard role. And he is, hands down, not including rookie contracts, he is one of, if not the most valuable contract in the league. You start Josh Hart out, and all of a sudden McCall or Josh Hart is playing shooting guard. There's just finite minutes left for one of, if not the best contracts in the league to play. And you need Deuce McBride to play. You need that shooting. You need that defense. So Kolek being good is just another argument for me in favor of Deuce McBride starting. Honestly, and I'll turn it over to Kev. I want him on here to be able to speak his piece. The more I think about it, the more it's just like, there are just so many positives to Deuce McBride starting. And yeah, I mean, an outcome where Kolek is playable from year one and can give you 14 nice minutes a night off the bench, that's just another argument for putting Deuce in the starting lineup and letting Hart share the court with Kolek.
Real quick, thanks everybody for being here. Lots of activity in the chat, lots of comments. I'm trying to get to them as we're talking as well. Really appreciate everyone for being here. It's been a really good conversation so far. And then huge thanks to Kev for being on and for being willing to come on, throw his camera on and chop it up with us here. Kev, I want to give you kind of like the last word to like lay out, go wherever you want to go with it. If you want to respond to anything we said or talk about something else different, please go ahead and do that.
Sure. Something I noticed, and I think another argument for McBride is, look, I think Mikal Bridges is a really good point of attack defender, but I think with the LaMelo matchup, we saw some of those limitations that he might have against one of those guys. And not that you're going to need to worry about the Hawks this year, but like against like a Trae Young or a Mikal Bridges or certainly a Tyrese Maxey, who you probably will need to worry about. So I think that like I agree with Geoff that arguments for Hart often revolve around the defense, and there are some matchups that maybe you'll want Hart out there, but I still think most of the time, not only are you getting an offensive boost, but there are things that Miles McBride better than Josh Hart defensively, and there's a reason that their defensive EPMs and their defensive metrics don't look all that dissimilar. And I think that, I think that Hart, I totally agree. I think Hart can provide a lot of value off the bench. I like Hart next to Landry Shamet, and if Tyler Kolek is as good of a spacer as I think he'll be, I think that makes a lot of sense. Especially if you're staggering like Mikal with the bench, then that's just like almost a perfect bench lineup. You have Hart, you have a spacer in Shamet, you have Kolek, who's a spacer, you have a creator in Bridges, and you have presumably a traditional good defensive back and five, whether that be Precious or someone else.
It should be Precious, and I mean, I think you raise another point of this perspective of Deuce starting, and that's that if when Hart starts, Tibbs is going to slide Precious to power forward and then play Sims at center. Even if you view Hart in the starting lineup as slightly better than Deuce, which I think the three of us all disagree with, but even if you do view the starting lineup with Hart as better than Deuce, the bench lineup takes such a big step back when you have two non-shooting bigs coming off the bench together and you just have no chance of scoring. So whatever small net gains you think Hart is in the starting lineup, you're losing that back and then some when your bench lineup takes such a hit. Whereas when Deuce is starting, you have Bridges with the bench unit. They're your wings. There's no sliding Precious to power forward with Bridges and Hart already there. Now you have a much more natural bench lineup that Kev just brought up of Kolek with Shamet, with Hart, with Bridges. That's XJ just went on KFS a week ago before the trade happened 2 weeks ago and talked about how the Knicks have a top 3 bench unit. If Kolek or Payne is a good backup point guard and you have them with Shamet shooting, with Mikal Bridges, who's a good player, with Hart, and, Precious playing center, all of a sudden that's a top 10 bench unit once again. This is the difference, in my opinion. Deuce or Hart starting is the difference between a fringe top 10 bench unit and one of the worst bench units in the league. That's what you're losing when you start Josh Hart, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And by the way, I just pumped my fist at Jose Quintana getting a big strikeout. So...
Well, you were awesome, Kev. We really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, we don't want to take up too much more of your time watching the Mets, and I think we have more guests. But again, thanks so much, man.
Peace out, guys.
Appreciate it, Kev. See you later, man. I think big thanks to Kev for coming on. I think that was a great. He added a lot of great stuff to the conversation. I feel like, Geoff, we haven't had enough really talking about the advantages of what Hart brings to the starting lineup and why that's part of the conversation piece. I know you have a great steel man for that perspective. A lot of people are saying, you need Deuce's scoring punch off the bench. You need Josh to kind of offset some of the rebounding deficiencies they're going to have with Cat at the 5. What would you lay out as your strongest argument for Josh Hart being a part of the starting lineup instead of Deuce McBride?
So I think the case for Josh Hart is 3-prong. I think the rebounding is a real thing. I think even if the offense with Deuce is going to be great, I think they're really, really small on the defensive end, and the overall net theoretically could be smaller if the defense just gets killed on both the offensive glass and because it's small. So with Josh Hart being a plus rebounder on the wing or the shooting guard, I think that mitigates some of the size disadvantages you have with Cat at center and OG Anunoby at power forward. I think you need a plus rebounder somewhere. I was very encouraged, I will say this, to almost play devil's advocate with this immediately. I don't know about you, but I thought OG Anunoby looked to be making an adamant effort to get on the glass at power forward in those lineups. I think it's clear that Tibbs has been like, if we're going to do this, you got to get on the glass. Like, he's never going to be Julius Randle on the glass, but I thought OG Anunoby made a clear effort on the glass. But regardless, whether OG Anunoby is a better rebounder this year or not, Josh Hart's rebounding will clearly help on the wing. So I think that's the first place I'd go. The second place, I know I sort of argued against it earlier. The pace does matter relatively. It's not 0. Just because I think it matters less, it's still a net positive to have you score more efficiently in the fast break. So I do think that is a small net gain that Josh Hart has over Deuce, even though, again, I think Deuce makes it back in the half court. And then the third argument would be the size to switch defensively, which once again, I think is the type of thing where Tibbs is going to, with Brunson and Cat as the 1 and the 5, Tibbs's goal is going to be keeping guards from getting into the paint. And the way to do that is to switch. You can't be blitzing. You do all these other things there's a path to the paint, and Tibbs isn't going to want that because the rim protection isn't as good. The best way to keep these guards and these wings outside the paint is if your 2 through 4 can just switch everything. And, you have these guards and these wings trying to force mismatches, and they go from Hart to OG to Bridges, and Tibbs is comfortable with all three of those guys on any guard or any wing. I don't think he's going to be as liberal with switching all if Deuce McBride is the shooting guard. I think that when you play a Jason Tatum, when you play even a Jalen Williams, the Knicks literally made a trade last year because Tibbs hated sitting quickly on Jalen Williams. We saw him bench quickly for RJ Barrett, and then the trade happened, 3 days later. So I don't know why he would be all the more comfortable with Deuce on a guy like Jalen Williams. And the point is that this could make a difference in overall team defense, which will eat at the overall net difference that Deuce's offense, Deuce being in the offense and the space he creates, helps you gain. So those are 3 areas where I would start if I was going to steel man the Hart perspective.
I think that's really strong. I think your switching point to me is the strongest point, and I think that really is, to David Goodman's point in the chat, it's really a matchup dependent situation in like a playoff environment to me. So if you are playing a team who has really big wings like the Celtics, for instance, then I can see a better argument for starting Josh Hart. I'm talking about, for me at least, over the 82 games of a season, where you're just trying to kind of have the best net rating possible over a really huge sample size, I think the Knicks are going to be better off with Deuce McBride starting than Josh Hart. Now, in specific situations where you're playing a team that has big wings, let's say you're playing the Orlando Magic or something like that. That's a different question because it's going to be hard as hell to score against the Orlando Magic, regardless. But I can see different matchups where it would make a lot more sense and that you might go with in a playoff environment. But across 82 games, I still find it hard to believe that the net is going to be more impactful starting Josh Hart over Deuce McBride. But just another quick reset. Shout out to everybody in the chat. I see a lot of comments. We'll try to start to get to some of these comments and kind of break down some of this stuff. I don't know if Geoff, you have anything else that you want to add to the Josh Hart Steel Man, as far as like, what do you think about the bench situation if Josh Hart starts? Do you think that we're going to see is it forced if Josh Hart starts that we see Jericho Sims play next to Precious Achiuwa off the bench? Because if that's the case, that's a complete deal breaker to me. I don't think that's even viable at all.
Yeah, I think just think like, who is going to be the first person off the bench for one of those 3 wings? Who else could it be? Is Tibbs going to put Landry Shamet in for OG Anunoby and then slide Hart and Bridges up and go that? That's interesting,
He should.
I guess.
Yeah,
no, I do think that's interesting. I just don't, Tibbs doesn't seem that type to me. I think he's going to want size out there, and Precious just feels like the most natural option for him. If Josh Hart was off the bench, it would clearly be Josh Hart. He would say, it's just so easy. If you think about how Tibbs rotates, how he's rotated for 4 seasons, if he wants Mikal Bridges with the bench unit, you bring Josh Hart in at the 6-minute mark for Mikal Bridges. He loves Josh Hart's versatility. You bring Josh Hart in for Mikal Bridges. Josh Hart's now playing small forward next to Deuce. Yep. And then when the bench lineup starts the second quarter, OG Anunoby's out, Mikal Bridges is back in. Now you've got Bridges and Josh Hart as the 3-4. He's got it's the easiest rotation possible.
Yeah.
It's so easy. And if the counter is, I just want Josh Hart in to start, he's going to play Precious at power forward, and then he's going to eventually have to take Cat out of the game. And what's going to happen then? You got to pull. It's not like Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges can play 48 minutes a night. They can't do it. And people have been saying how important it is that OG Anunoby only plays 32, 33 minutes a night so that he's peaking in the postseason. And I think that's something XJ and I agree with strongly. Well, if OG Anunoby's only playing 32, 33 minutes a night, something I'm already skeptical is going to happen, but if that's happening, there's only one answer when Josh Hart's starting, and that's that Precious is going to play power forward, and somebody else needs to be the backup center, and that's going to be Jericho Sims. I think this is the inevitable domino that's going to fall when Josh Hart starts, and I think in 2 months, the people who are saying you got to start Josh Hart, they're going to be talking about how bad the depth is and that the Knicks have to make a trade, but they didn't have to make a trade. There was a better option available to them with the talent that they have. And this goes back to something XJ and I talk about all the time on here. It's not that the team won't be good. It's not that the starting lineup won't be good. The starting lineup with Josh Hart is going to be excellent. It's going to be a top 5 starting lineup. It is about this team reaching its ceiling. And the ceiling version of this team comes with Deuce McBride in the starting lineup for all these reasons we're talking about, because of the spacing, because of the rotations. The bench lineup gets better when Josh Hart is on the bench, because Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart are your nominal wings. You still have a 4 or a 3.5 plus 1, as opposed to a 3 plus 1 with Jericho Sims and Precious Achiuwa as your 4 and 5. It's night and day difference. You can reasonably argue that if Josh Hart is in the starting lineup isn't even the best lineup. You can reasonably argue that. And you can unequivocally argue that the bench lineup is way worse. So I just don't understand what even the counter argument is. I'm trying to steelman the other perspective, but I think the gain is enormous for the Knicks if they start Deuce McBride.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think that was so well put about kind of the domino effect of each of those different situations, and that's a big part of it. I don't know that I agree with you necessarily, and this is going to sound blasphemous and people may not like this. I don't know that the Knicks have a top 5 starting lineup with Josh Hart instead of Deuce McBride. I know they have a top 5 starting lineup with Deuce McBride instead of Josh Hart. I don't know that it's the same with the reverse. We'll see, but I'm not as confident at all personally. I'm going to go through some of the comments. Let's kind of rapid fire. We got a bunch of comments, so I just want to see what people are saying out there. Kind of starting back from a few ago. Joe Curry says Knicks signed Moses Brown today. I heard he's a center on a 10-day contract. Yeah, Moses Brown, not much. I don't know too much about him. I know he hasn't played a ton throughout his NBA career. I know he's a big rebounder. Tons of his offensive and defensive rebound percentages are like, Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein level, over a small amount of minutes. So I'm sure that's why the Knicks found him really interesting. We're talking 18 to 19% offensive rebounding rates and 29% defensive rebounding rates. So that's very likely why the Knicks signed him. I don't know if you know anything about Moses Brown specifically, Geoff.
I know he can rebound, so you nailed it.
Yeah. Let's see. David Goodman says, please don't read into a preseason game. Guys are not giving real effort defensively. I think that goes to about Mikal Bridges' defense maybe on LaMelo Ball at some points, which I think there's some validity to that.
First of all, the possession everybody was showing, Mikal played fine defense.
Yeah, it wasn't even bad.
His defense was fine. That was just LaMelo being a star, as you pointed out for years. Yeah. I think Mikal has I think there's a reasonable concern that Mikal might struggle against guys like Maxey, against guys that Deuce is made to guard. And I think that, but to XJ's point, you can make the same argument about Deuce against bigger wings. So there are kind of equal trade-offs against specific matchups, against guys like Trae Young, against guys like Maxey, against Garland or Mitchell. You want Deuce McBride on those guys over Mikal Bridges, but against guys like Tatum, Jalen Williams, Luka Doncic, these bigger wings who have the ball, you want 3 big wings who can switch, who make it harder for them. So That's kind of a net neutral trade-off to me. And the important thing is which lineup will be better over the totality of 82 games. And I think we have a pretty strong case that over 82 games, the Deuce lineup's going to be better.
Absolutely. Agree with all that. Manny Campos had said, if we're letting Kev talk fake trades, then I'll put my Mitch for Herb Jones trade out there. Never going to happen, but Herb OG Bridges would be ridiculous on defense. Geoff, we've talked about this. That would
we've talked about this. I will say, and Kev and I joke in the DMs enough that I feel like I can say this. When Kev got on stage and immediately went to the trade machine, I was just like, uh-oh. I was like, oh
no. Shout out Kev for going to the trades. Imagine having Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns and being like, man, we need to shore up our defense. What 3 players can we put in there with Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns to shore up our defense? I don't know. Maybe Herb Jones, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges. That's just like that would be completely absurd. I
want people to consider another perspective on this exact topic, because a lot of the concern comes with the defense. There was a really, really amazing episode of, I don't even know what it was called. It wasn't an episode of anything, but it was great NBA content about 10 years ago Haralabob joined Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe, and they previewed the 2014-2015 NBA season. And it was before Kevin Love was traded to the Cavs, but everyone knew Kevin Love was getting traded. And if you don't remember, you're not an NBA historian like I am, everyone thought that Kevin Love was going to the Warriors. Everyone thought it was Klay Thompson plus picks for Kevin Love. And the big concern, similarly back then, was how can you build a great team around a 1-5 like or 1-4 or 1-5 like Kevin Love and Steph Curry, who will just get roasted defensively endlessly. And Zach Lowe, who's brilliant, and Haralabob both jokingly said, your defense gets a lot better when the other team's consistently taking the ball out of the basket. We've alluded to this on this show. Half-court offenses are worse than offenses coming off of rebounds. Part of the argument for the Deuce lineup that a lot of people aren't considering is that the Deuce lineup might be better defensively just because the other team is taking the ball out of the basket a higher percent of the time and forced into half-court offense. So your intuition might be that Josh Hart's size is more valuable defensively, and that might be true. If you had to defend a possession for your life, it might be reasonable to say that the Josh Hart lineup is going to be better at defense. But the Knicks' actual defense, like their defensive rating, might be better with the Deuce lineup because the Deuce lineup's offense is so much better that the other team has to play in the half court a higher percentage of the time.
That's a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's an excellent point. Let's go. We're going to go kind of rapid fire through the comments real quick, and then we're going to bring up Jaden, who's going to kind of come on and talk a little bit about his perspective there. Would be cool because he's a coach at the high school level, and it would be cool to get his perspective as well on some of the things that we're talking about here. So we're just going to go super rapid fire, maybe like less than 1 minute on each of them. David Goodman, Sims should not play at all. He's terrible at everything. I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with Sims right now. I hope that's not the case moving forward, but yeah, I don't know. Geoff, anything you want to add?
I don't think Sims should play NBA minutes. No, I don't. I think it would be really bad. And again, I'm more intrigued if Tibbs is willing to go 3 guards plus one of Bridges or OG with Precious as a bench unit. I still think the overall net is in the favor of Deuce, but I'm less concerned, I'll say, about the potential of Hart starting if it's not Precious plus Sims in the front court. If opening night, the front court is Precious plus Sims, that's trouble, man. That's like those lineups are going to get killed.
Yep. Agreed. I totally agreed. I forgot I could bring these up. That's cool. Dirty Dancer says Deuce being starter caliber on a finals contender and making $4 million a year would be insane. Must have great trade value. I totally agree. It's like I that's why he's so valuable. That's why his contract's so valuable, because he gives you literal starting caliber guard play for less than what rookies make that are drafted late in the first round. It's completely unreal. It's unreal.
Yeah, the only thing to consider, I'm not like being like a, what do you call it, actually, a well actually person. Guys like Deuce actually don't have that much trade value because most players who are worth something cost a lot of money, and everybody's operating over the cap these days.
Yeah,
so
true.
Like 20 years ago, when cap space mattered, he would have been one of the most valuable assets like in the NBA. But right now, with everybody operating over the cap, it's like, okay, yeah, we really want Deuce, but is there any chance you have like a bad contract you can tie to him so that the money works? And when you're a smart team like the Knicks, you really don't have that much bad money, like that you could make the argument that the Knicks have all plus EV contracts. I think.
Yeah, you could definitely make that argument. Totally.
Maybe
agree.
maybe not Towns, but
yeah, maybe not. No, I'm not gonna say the other person who might not be. Let's see from Nick Yak. Why all the changes when Mitch will be back late November? Just start Sims and keep the dynamic bench together. Well, I don't know. I think we both are not kind of like on the Sims bandwagon, but I at least understand the reasoning for what you're trying to say.
I think there's a more important side of this that's being implied here that I think you and I would disagree with. I don't think either one of us would start Mitch when he comes back.
Yeah, I wouldn't start Mitch at all, but I think he's going to, but I wouldn't.
That's interesting. I wonder, we haven't given Tibbs this benefit of the doubt, and we should, because there's not a more meticulous coach in the league. He thinks about everything. He works his ass off. I wonder if part of starting Hart is just, I'm going to start Mitch when he comes back. I just want someone to get me there.
Yeah. That's a good point. Interesting. Let's see. Bayside Jr. says, I think Geoff brought me to his side. A bench with Payne, Kolick, Shamit, Hart is good and smart and veteran, so should, at worst, keep the game close for the starters. Yeah.
Let's go, Bayside. Love it. I love that.
I agree with that. Yeah. Let's see.
And remember to Bayside's point there, or I mean, to go along with Bayside's point, the Hart lineup is going to play plenty of minutes. He's going to play with these starters.
He's going to play 30 minutes. Like
he's going to play a ton of minutes.
Yeah.
And this lineup that people want to start with Hart is going to close like every game.
Yeah,
it's going to get seen.
Yeah,
we need to see this lineup with Deuce too. Starting is like the only way.
Yeah, great point. Dirty Dancer says, it's hard for me to tell if OG poor rebounding matters or not. Feel like he makes boards easier for teammates. I do see him boxing out a ton, and I don't care about his personal rebounding numbers. Shout out Obi Toppin. How can he be a power forward and have 3 rebounds? I don't care about how many rebounds he has. I just care about how the team rebounds while he's on the court. And I think OG is pretty good at that, so I agree.
Yep.
Let's see. Thinking the playoffs from David Goodman. I think in the playoffs the lineups will definitely be matchup dependent. Totally agree with that. I think that's
dude. You've said his name like 3 times. Sounds like David's killing it in the comment section. Every single time he said something, I've been like, "Yep."
He's crushing it. Jair Smith. I'm putting this up. He says Pistons aren't going to try to trade Duren because somebody was talking about a Duren trade. Jair. I play pickup basketball with Jair. Jair is basically a mini Julius Randle. Like he just bodies people up and gets to the rim. And I'm basically like a mini Deuce McBride. Maybe that's why I want Deuce to start, because I just see myself in Deuce. Just get after it defensively, hit shots, and just play super aggressively. So shout out Jair. What up, man?
You're telling me the guy who thinks that centers who can't shoot threes are going to be banned from the NBA in 5 years is a pesky defender who can't shoot?
No, I can shoot. I said I'm Deuce. I said I'm a mini
Deuce.
Deuce.
Okay, you said you're Deuce. Yeah. All right, my bad. For some reason, I thought there was an implication that you couldn't shoot.
No, I'm a little streaky with the shot, but when it's going, it's going.
Hell
yeah. Joe Curry, Yak. So you think Robinson is gonna play so he can be traded? Then, that was regarding some potential trade stuff that we were talking about earlier. Let's see. Did anyone see from Nick Yak? Did anyone else see Ball running a layup line with Cat at the center, and the Wolves were 28th protecting the rim last time he was starting center? Hey, this is a reasonable perspective.
This is a reasonable concern. I think something to think about, Nick Yak, and XJ makes this point all the time. The defense, it's all about the net. So if you're going to argue that the Knicks rim protection being bad is worth starting Mitch or starting Hart so the defense is better, you need to know that what you lose offensively doesn't make up for that. And I think both XJ and I's perspective is that while the defense might be middle of the road, maybe slightly below average, the offense with Towns at the 5 is just so good that the overall net, that is the best version of this team from an overall net standpoint. The other thing that I want to say is that rim protection matters less when your point of attack defense is elite. And so even though you get quote unquote smaller with Deuce, if Mikal Bridges can operate like he did in Phoenix, you have 3 guys in OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Deuce McBride who aren't going to let their guy get into the paint and going to make it a lot simpler on Cat to protect the rim than the guys who were on Minnesota when Cat was playing center 5 years ago did. That defense was woeful and on the perimeter.
Yep, absolutely. All right, thank you guys for all the comments. We had tons of comments, lots of good conversation going on in the chat, lots of good conversation going on here. If Coach Jaden is ready to jump on, I'll bring you on, and then kind of let's see what your perspective is. I'll bring you up, and then you'll have the floor. I'm not sure if you land on the hard side or the Deuce side, but whichever, please jump in and let us know what you're thinking. What's going on, man? Thank you so much for being on.
Hey, what's up, fellas? Nice to finally talk to you guys outside of a DM chat. Am I coming through clearly?
You're super clear. Good. I don't know if you have a professional mic, but you sound super clear right now.
This is a $200 laptop. So funny enough, I came on here pretty split between the two. kind of defending more of the Hart position because I know everybody loves the 5-out, the shooting. I got it. Like the clear advantage is there. But the funny thing is I came on here coming to do that and then listening to Geoff, and now I'm pretty sided on the Deuce side. So, but I still kind of wanted to say some stuff about Hart starting, because I don't think it's as easy just to say, like it's just the lack of shooting. And not that you guys are saying that, but we've talked about the rebounding, the defense, having, I think there is an advantage with Mikal being point of attack with size. Funny enough, you were mentioning big wings being what you wanted, but I saw, last year, not that it was really effective because Brunson is incredible, but everybody's strategy was to put big wings on Brunson rather than their small guards. And I know that's a different, Maxey being a small guard and Brunson being a small guard are two different games. It's not how you defend. You don't defend the same. When it comes to Hart, so funny enough, XJ brought it up. I do coach at the high school level, and we have to figure out spacing without having players that are actually really good at shooting. You just make with what's due. Because even good shooters on the high school level, aren't good shooters. Unless you're, coaching for a very, very, very big school, and I am not. So kind of this whole summer, we've been developing kind of an offense where we need to create space we don't have shooting bigs on any of the varsity through freshman levels, at least to the level that you want them taking, the amount of threes. And me and XJ have talked about this where, and we talked about in a DM about a specific type of shooting versus attacking a closeout. And this is not the same thing, but I don't want, if my big isn't a good shooter, I'm not going to make him shoot threes just for the sake of shooting or for the sake of spacing. So what we looked at this summer is how can we create gaps for drivers without necessarily having the shooting. And where I was probably about 4 months ago was very, very pro Deuce. And I thought he should have started in the playoffs when OG went down. Funny enough, was at that game 3. I wish Deuce would have started just for the fact that, I don't know, something could have changed and not that shot going in. When DJ Zulo brought up a really good point probably a couple weeks ago about creating double gaps. And I forget who, he's a Miami Heat fan. He posts really good stuff. It's John something.
John Jablanca.
Yeah,
yes.
Shout out John Jablanca, friend of the show.
So he brought up another point too, where he questioned how much spacing ends up being a little redundant, and how Boston started kind of in that 5-out and then kind of went to that 4-out 1-in with Drew. And I know Hart doesn't provide the same offensive skills that Drew does, but that's where I think there's a big advantage with Hart that Deuce doesn't have, because I don't think the Knicks look at Deuce as a creator or necessarily an offensive advantage creator outside of his shooting and his cutting. And they're great. He's a really good cutter, really good shooter. But I think Hart being able to play more inside to a degree that I don't think Deuce is going to be able to. If Deuce is playing a dunker spot, I just don't think he's like, and I'm using dunker spot just as a point, I don't think Deuce can create, that type of advantage that Hart can do. Even though Hart's not that much bigger, but he plays bigger, and we all know that. And that's where I look, where the real pro with Hart is that I think when you just have the 5 shooters out there, your offense in like a 2K setting seems perfect because everybody's spaced out. You can just drive. Nobody's helping the way that they should be. But I think in a real setting, I think Deuce just gets left not necessarily alone, but I don't take Tibbs as a very creative offensive coach, and maybe he will be this season. Not that he's not a good offensive coach, but it's going to be a lot of Brunson pistol actions. It's going to be a lot of Cat post ups. It's going to be, Cat maybe, at the high post and somebody coming off a cut. Like, it's going to be pretty simple stuff. And it's been simple with him the whole time. So I think Hart just brings some intangible stuff that Deuce just doesn't. And when the offense really bogs down, which it could not, it absolutely could just never bog down. And we just have this, worldly offense that's never been seen and certainly is a possibility. I just don't know if I place my mind in the mind of Tibbs. I don't know if he looks at it like that. And I think he looks at the fact that he has 3 healthy centers that don't protect at the rim, that he doesn't like at the level that he wants. And I think if he's going to be okay with playing Cat in a 5-out, he's going to want somebody, which, like Geoff said, who is an outstanding rebounder, who is a plus rebounder, who something that OG and Mikal haven't quite shown yet. And then he's going to want to lean into something like that to where he is more comfortable with the lack of rim protection. But you guys have stated, pretty well that that screws the bench up, and then he's going to lean into Precious at the 4, and no thanks.
I have to say, Jaden, I think you've made a ton of good points. One, I just want to ask you. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I want to ask XJ a question to go to sort of support your perspective. But the only one thing that stood out to me that I find kind of interesting is we agree that Tibbs is not the most creative play designer. I think his specialty is defense. I think that he has pretty basic schemes when it comes to offense. I find it interesting that you believe that, and yet you think it could be better to sort of force him to try to find these ways to create space, as opposed to having just the most natural space that anybody with 4 really good shooters and Jalen Brunson, you don't even have to run an offense. It's just like, it's literally perfect for a basic read and react, because what is the defense going to do? They're either going to have to guard Jalen Brunson or help off of their guy to help when Jalen Brunson dusts the man defender, he forces help or he gets a layup, and then you don't need an offense. So I'm kind of curious in your perspective there, because I think once you replace Deuce with Hart, you do have to start doing these creative things you were talking about to try to approximate the space that Deuce's natural shooting gives you.
No, I think that's a very good question. And I think it's I think it's tough to answer just in general, because it's hard to retort back from space out, give Brunson the ball. I mean, that's extremely effective. It's amazing. I would love to do it and see it again. Like I do swing towards Deuce because of this whole conversation, specifically because of that. I think I look at last year, and while Towns can provide the spacing and the scoring that we didn't have with Randall, and the passing that we didn't have with Hartenstein, I look at the way teams played against us last year and all the pressure they put on Brunson to create. And I think what Hart does really well, and it's something that is kind of unexplainable, and he just has the tangible things that he kind of just makes shit up. Sorry, I don't know. Can I curse on here? Cool.
Hell yeah. Yeah, bro.
Yeah.
I think Hart just does shit, and it works and it happens. And I don't know how to put a number on that. And it's stuff that I just don't think that Deuce does at quite the level. And I think that would be the argument for, I don't think, bringing it back to the double gap, I think creating double gaps for Brunson to drive, because he's athletic. He's not as athletic as what you would want in a driving slashing point guard, or just a slashing player in general. And I think creating double gaps in a sense that giving him the most space as possible, because 5-out, yes, theoretically gives you the space, but if I'm driving from the top of the key, right or left, doesn't matter. I have a help defender that's immediately there. And if it's really spaced out, as me and XJ have kind of talked about in a DM, how much can you really help off of that? That's a different question. But I think giving Brunson the ability to completely spaced out, to where he's driving and the closest help defender is coming off a corner or coming off, the opposite side of the floor. I think that's where the advantage would truly shine with someone like Hart. If you have Deuce in there, I don't want Deuce playing anywhere inside of the arc when he doesn't have the ball or if he's not cutting. That'd be the whole point. He wants space out. And I think that's the same way that I think with Cat, that Cat's shooting is awesome and I want him spacing the floor. If I have Cat down at the dunker spot, then what is the point of Cat even, like, what was the point of trading for Cat when we're not going to use him as a spacer to begin with? Which you can create double gaps in a 5-out without just giving Brunson the ball and going. You set your off-ball actions. You just pick and roll, Brunson and Cat to death, and teams are not going to be able to stop it. I just think that's easier said than done, or maybe it's not, and maybe coaches in the current climate just refuse to do so. Maybe it is that easy. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're raising a lot of good questions. I do think though that when it comes to Hart versus Deuce in the dunker spot, it's kind of a like a false or an unimportant analogy. I'm not being dismissive. I just think that Hart is better. I think that's unquestionable. Hart is better in the dunker spot. But the debate would be what's better, Hart in the dunker spot or Deuce spacing out. Like, just because Hart's better in the dunker spot than Deuce is, you don't want Deuce in the dunker spot. Theoretically, if Deuce is on the court in this lineup, you want him spacing out. You're trying to create the most space possible. I'm going to throw a question back to you, though, Jaden. I've seen so many people talk about this idea that I can't dismiss it offhand. It doesn't seem right to me, but I don't want to dismiss it offhand because a bunch of people I respect have discussed it, including on Thinking Basketball. They discussed this. So what they've said is that Jalen Brunson actually isn't the ideal type of heliocentric primary to maximize and take advantage of maximum space. And what they used Ja Morant as an example, if I recall correctly. They were like, if you put Ja in this Knicks lineup, this is somebody who, give him 4 shooters, he's gonna take advantage. You want one of those line drive, beeline guards to get to the rim. Those guys who, they get to the rim, they operate above the rim, and they're really fast because that's where help defense really matters. That's where rim protection really matters. Jalen Brunson is more methodical. He loves the mid-range. And even in a 5-out offense, he might operate just exactly the same. He might not even capitalize on this space. Is it possible that XJ and I are overestimating the impact of Deuce's space versus what these things that you talked about, all these other little things Hart does, and maybe Jalen Brunson in this heliocentric offense won't actually capitalize on all the space?
I think that's a very valid question, especially just questioning your own belief there on whether this would actually have the results that you want, especially because we've not seen what a spacing lineup like this would ever happen with Brunson. We don't have the numbers here for it. I think it's really tough because I think in a quick reaction answer, I agree that I think someone like Ja or even a Maxey or somebody who can get to the rim at that type of level would take more advantage of the space and certainly would take advantage of a defense and make them, are we going to help off somebody like Towns or Deuce if I can get to the rim at will like that? And I think Brunson does it really well, but you're right. He doesn't get to the rim like that, and he does love his areas. I think that's really tough, and I think maybe, to put my headspace into what Tibbs would be thinking, I think that's, maybe that is the question that they all have. They've only had Towns for a week, so maybe that is what they're looking at, that Brunson doesn't get to the rim at the level that those guys do. And do we want Brunson isoing and creating all of these shots in a 5-out versus just some of the random stuff that can happen when you have someone like Hart out there? That's tough. That's a very good question.
Yeah,
What do you think, XJ?
I mean, I wanted to chime in specifically on because I think there's so much good stuff. I'm really glad you came on, Jaden, to talk about a lot of these concepts and so much good stuff that came up. To me, when we're talking about some of the single and double gaps, for those who don't know in our audience who are listening, so like a single gap is essentially, when players are one pass away and the distance between them is not super wide such that you can really easily drive through that gap. It's technically that's called like a single gap, and a double gap is when they're either two passes away or there's a big opening where you can kind of drive through that gap, typically in the slot or in in a different place on the perimeter. And when you have 5-out spacing, the gaps are smaller because everybody's on the perimeter, and the distance between one pass away is smaller than if there were 4 on the perimeter and one player down on the inside. With that out of the way, to me, I think it's like, if you have this single gap concept, I don't believe that it's harder to get to the rim or to drive through those gaps at the NBA level. I'll say for sure, because you have the threat of the shooters. You are going to have to help off of those players. And the point is, it's almost like a cover zero defense in football. If you have no safeties back, there is so much risk of if Jalen Brunson gets through one of these gaps, he's getting all the way to the rim. We don't see Jalen Brunson get to the rim as much and be as efficient as he can be. And I think that in this situation with the floor spaced out the way it is, I don't think we're going to see a lot of these pull-ups from the short mid-range from Jalen Brunson trying to make really tough shots and do it at a really consistent and efficient level. I think we're going to see Jalen Brunson getting to the rim. And I don't think teams really are going to be able to live with that. I think that we're going to see a ton of really high efficiency Jalen Brunson shots. I think if he starts with Deuce McBride, I think, and Geoff has talked about this before, I think we see a true Jalen Brunson MVP season. And I think that's because his efficiency is going to spike completely insanely. And that is sort of theoretical to some extent, but I also think it's something that, and Geoff, you've talked about this, we need to see it, because I don't see why it wouldn't play out that way. And so we are going to see the Josh Hart lineup. We know that we're going to see a ton of it regardless of which lineup starts, but I think we need to see how effective this 5-out situation can be. And I do generally just kind of not buy the idea that it's harder to drive in a single gap situation at the professional level with the level of shooter that we have in the league, with the level of shooters that the Knicks are going to have, where their worst shooter in this lineup is Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges has probably never been the worst shooter in any lineup he's ever played on in his entire life, but he's clearly the worst shooter in this lineup, in my opinion. So I think we see a lot of both Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges as well initiating and being able to get to the rim if you have this 5-out situation. So I'm not as worried about kind of converting to a 4 versus 1 and a 4-and-1 as opposed to a 5-out. And also I'll say this, for the Celtics, Jason Tatum is really good. Jaylen Brown's really good. None of them are as good as on-ball creators and initiators as Jalen Brunson is. I just don't think they are. Jaylen Brown doesn't have the handle. Jason Tatum doesn't have the proclivity. He wants to pull up for twos. So I think Jalen Brunson's on a different level from both of those guys. And so I think if Jalen Brunson was on the Celtics, I don't even think we would need to see a situation where they sink Drew Holiday into the dunker spot or something like that. So that's just covering a little bit of what you talked about. I thought there was so much really good stuff there. So
yeah, and Boston has 5 actual advantage creators where even if nobody needs to get to the rim, every one of them can
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jaden, any last things you want to say? We're gonna kind of close it out. We're getting closer to tip off. Maybe in about 10 minutes, the game's gonna be starting. I didn't see the lineups come out, so I'm assuming it's the same starting lineup. But really appreciate having you on, man. You added a lot of substance to the conversation. Any last things you want to say before you hop off?
No, I'm all good. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for letting me hop on.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. You were awesome.
All right, Geoff. Let's close it out. I thought this was a really substantive conversation. We got into a lot of the nitty-gritty. I think we talked about a lot of the different aspects of this. One thing I want to say is that I dropped a little poll of who do people think the Knicks' 5th starter should be. You will find this interesting. Josh Hart did not win this poll. Deuce McBride did not win this poll. Precious Achiuwa actually tied with Deuce McBride for the first in percentages. They're all really close. 35% Precious, 35% Deuce, 29% now Josh Hart. So I think that's an interesting finding. It seems like fans are really, really split on who should start, and Precious is right there with the other two. So I think that's really interesting. Anything you want to say about that, and anything else before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think that my perspective about that would be I actually think there's a better argument for Precious than Hart. Not because I think Precious is better than Hart. I think Hart is obviously better. But I think what it does to the bench lineup and just the rotation in general, I think what Hart starting does to that is just going to have ramifications that a lot of people aren't thinking about. And I think if and when Hart starts, there will be a good amount of people who, if they're open-minded in a couple months, will be like, look back and be like, oh man, this actually did stuff to the depth that we didn't consider. I'm very worried about that. Again, I become less worried about it if Tibbs makes the bench unit the 3-guard plus a starter plus Precious. I think that mitigates it somewhat, but I still think on the net that Deuce starting is the best for the Knicks' overall ceiling.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I agree with that, and we'll see how it plays out. This will be something we'll continue to monitor throughout the entire season. But at least for this preseason game tonight, we're going to see the same lineup back out there, and there'll be a lot to look at in terms of how they guard Josh Hart. You know, who's guarding Josh Hart? Is it the center on Hart? Is it a wing on Town? So it'll be really interesting, especially going against not the most potent Wizards lineup as well. So yeah, good conversations all around. Thank you so much for everybody who contributed in the comments, in the chat. Thank you so much to Kevin Danishevsky and Coach Jaden, who both hopped on and gave really great substantive commentary. I love doing this because you guys really kill it when whoever comes on. So that's awesome. And yeah, I think that any last words, Geoff, before we hop off? It looked like Geoff is on his way out, I think.
No. I like Kev had the Mets game on the side, and something very bad for Mets fans just happened. So I was kind of just like, it caught my attention for a second. But no, thanks to everyone for came and listened to us. We hope more of you in the future will have interest in coming up on stage, because we do plenty of stuff with just XJ and I, and we're super grateful to all of you who love hearing what we have to say. But the most important thing we can ever say to you is that we don't have our minds made up. We're not those types of people. We want to hear all sorts of other perspectives, and we will give genuine thought to anyone who wants to come up and share their perspective. So next time we do this, we hope that more of you will, put yourselves out there, because we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Yep, I echo everything Geoff said, and thank you all so much. We'll see you next on the next episode. We have a big season premiere for the Knicks dropping next week with some really amazing guests. It's going to be a great episode, so hopefully you guys watch that. And like and subscribe if you haven't done it already. If you're still here, hour and a half into our live stream, you've already liked and subscribed. I know that. So appreciate all the support that we always get from you guys. And we'll see you next time.